a lot of people, they just get so stuck in what they're doing now and they don't want to reinvent themselves.
But a lot of people feel it's the opposite. Tech is constantly firing people from their jobs and creating new technology that is removing jobs that used to exist.
So the question you ask yourself is, where do you fit into the future? I guess this is one of the parts of my secret sauce, is that.
Welcome to the next episode of the Entrepreneurial Excellence Podcast. It is with a ton of fun pleasure that I have Joshua Litwack. Joshua and I just met really recently, and we just freaking vibed. So I was like, dude, you need to come on. I need to keep learning from you because this is dope. And so wanted to get him on, but more important, to give a little bit of background on Josh. He is someone who's worn a huge number of hats, from entrepreneur, operator, revenue leader, to educator, global traveler. He's CEO and co-founder of a stealth AI startup, which will be probably launching right around the time this episode goes live. Co-founder and former CRO of Paragon Data Labs, which was acquired by Intap, and also a university professor in entrepreneurship, which I know we'll want to dive into about what it's like teaching being an entrepreneur to being an entrepreneur, and maybe giving some of your other professional colleagues a little bit of a hard time, which you kind of say you can't really teach it until you've actually walked in those shoes. But before building and scaling Paragon, Joshua honed his expertise at Bloomberg and BlackRock, where he led client engagement and enterprise systems for some of the world's largest asset managers. Joshua, it is with a ton of pleasure I welcome you to the show. Great to have you here.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So excited to be here.
Good. So I like to kick it off just to start with everyone. How do you define entrepreneurial excellence? What does that even mean?
Well, I think the first thing is doing the impossible and creating opportunity for people. I think that's really what it is. After I sold my first company, I had one of my investors say something really profound to me that really got me thinking, which is, Josh, do you realize you willed this company into existence? And I spent a lot of time thinking about what it means to will something into existence, right? You could talk about creating something. You could talk about all the different facades that people talk about entrepreneurship. But at the end of the day, if you will something into existence, you're doing the impossible and you're creating opportunity for people along the way. And for me, I'm an immigrant to the US, grew up in Canada, heard a lot about the American dream and all that. And for me, this is what I think the modern American dream is. It's entrepreneurial excellence and creating opportunity for other people, and seeing a vision of what's impossible that many others don't see.
First to ask, I think a lot of people, and this is sort of in my mind right now because we're recording this shortly after Charlie Kirk's shooting, and you're based in Utah and teach at university in Utah. I know there are a lot of people who would say, I'm going to put this in quotes for those who are listening, but quote unquote tech bros like you and me aren't actually creating opportunities for other people. In fact, we're taking them away in creating a worse world. What would you say to that? Obviously, you just said, hey, we're creating opportunity, but a lot of people feel it's the opposite. Tech is constantly firing people from their jobs and creating new technology that is removing jobs that used to exist.
Yeah, I'm going to respectfully disagree on that one. And I have a lot of different elements to that. And I think being faculty at the University of Utah has really taught me a lot, about what creating opportunity for people really means in general. So the first thing I would say is that the economy today is very different than the economy was years ago, right? If someone today is trying to expect their job to be the same 10 years from now, fundamentally, I'm sorry to say it to you, it's just not going to be, right? So it's easy to say that tech is taking jobs from people. What I actually think is there's a lot of opportunities being created by tech. And what we should be encouraging people to do is use the technology of our generation to figure out where their job function is going to fit into the future, right? And I can tell you, I myself employ multiple people. I know a lot of my friends that are tech bros employ multiple people. And when you think of what a lot of the US economy is really based on, it is technology. It is revamping the way that our economy functions. So for someone to say that tech is taking away jobs, obviously there's a repurposing of jobs. And, frankly, with AI, we're sitting on one of the biggest technological innovations, definitely of my lifetime, but, my peers and whatnot at the U who are, let's just say, are a little more seasoned than I think that's the word that we should phrase it. The reality is we all recognize that the economy has changed drastically. So I think, what we need to help students see is that there's an opportunity for them in technology. Every industry is going to be innovated with technology. So the question you ask yourself is, where do you fit into the future? And that's really what I try to focus on with folks.
I love that idea. Like, where do you fit in the future? And maybe to give an example too, just because this keeps coming to my mind when we're talking like opportunity. I don't think anyone wants to go back to a world where taxi cabs were the main way to get a car to drive you around. Like, for anyone who remembers those days, which I very much do, living in San Francisco, taxi cabs only pick you up in a few specific parts of San Francisco. And otherwise, you literally had to walk home if you were out late at night, let's say, or you would never get one. I remember calling a cab and they're like, oh yeah, it's going to take 2 or 3 hours for someone to maybe come get you. And it just never would happen. In why would you want to go back to that? And then suddenly Uber came out and now suddenly everyone can be a driver and pick up a few extra hours of work. Now, other people now are getting mad about that and saying, well, now you have Waymo that's coming in, it's a self-driving car and all these Uber drivers will lose their job. And it's like, to your point, people need to continuously find ways to grow, rebrand themselves, pick up new roles. And technology will take some roles away, but create many, probably millions of new ones.
Yeah, definitely. And I could give another really good example of that. So early on in my career, and I'm sure we'll unpack this later, I grew within Bloomberg's leadership development program. And at the time, I was doing my CFA designation. For those that don't know, that's the Chartered Financial Analyst designation. Very, very challenging designation to get, put a lot of nights and weekends of work into it. And many of my peers would go to me and they would say, hey, Josh, like, you're working in technology. Like, why would you want to do your CFA? It's so much work for you not to want to be a portfolio manager. And what I told them, at the time was, I think this whole industry is going to be automated with technology in the next 5 to 10 years. And I want to be able to speak the language in the way that, the people that are going to use this technology are going to do. At the time, I was working in portfolio and risk analytics at Bloomberg. I saw how the industry was going to change. I kind of watched the whole industry go from this like kind of paper and pen world into, digitized records and portfolio management. And so what was so crazy is people were like, you're so crazy. There's no way that's going to be the case. And, 5 years later, the CFA curriculum itself had a section on financial technology and how, as CFA charter holders, we can understand this technology and understand how it impacts the industry. So one could say like, oh, do you need as many administrative people in your back office? Do you need all of the, yeah, the world has changed. But the reality is there's people that get ahead of that change and try to upskill and try to learn how they can adapt and grow. I've been an example of that and I've done well for myself. And what I encourage everybody to do is think, 5 years, 10 years ahead, always think 3 steps ahead. If you're thinking 1 step ahead, that's great. But generally it's the 3 steps ahead. And so your assumptions can be validated or not, right? But I think that fundamentally to expect the world to continue the way it is now, the Uber example you gave is a great one. I was living in San Francisco, working at Bloomberg and BlackRock while Uber came into existence, right? And it was one of those things. I remember when Lyft came on the scene. I remember all of like the different moments. I remember when the little pink mustache Lyft would like pick you up and it's like, oh, what's the difference between Uber and Lyft? Oh yeah, Uber's so commercial and Lyft is like a cool guy that you're talking to. It's like, is that what Lyft is today? No. Have you talked to a Lyft driver and like asked them like no, right? But the reality is as technologists, what we're trying to do is figure out how do we net make someone's life better, right? And the reality is the world is changing at an exponential pace. A lot of people are really struggling with that. But I think as entrepreneurs, it's our job to think about what the future looks like and how we adapt that technology, for this generation.
Yeah, no, I'm obviously feel very much the same way. I mean, the whole thesis of my company, Chore, right, is the idea that I was just on a call. I got late to our podcast getting started because I was talking to a guy and he was like, where were you? I started my company 15 years ago and I've had this problem over and over and over again. And it slowed me down. He's like, the amount of time I wasted dealing with like back office operation stuff, which was not my core belief. It's not why I started my business, slowed me down. So my whole thesis, what I tell my whole team is we are making it easier to be a successful entrepreneur. And to me, more successful entrepreneurs mean a better world overall. End story, full stop. And that's what net win.
Yeah, and your marketing kicks ass. I was actually just sharing, your so that you can statements with my COO, and they were like, "Wow, like this is really good marketing, right? Like you can focus on other things when the admin is taken care of, right?" And that's a perfect example of technological innovation. Like what you're doing, would that have been possible a few years ago? No. right? But the reality is you take the things that allow us to move the industry forward. And I think you're a perfect example of that. And honestly, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to join this podcast, because you're such a gem of a human.
Way too nice. I'm doing my best every day. I really am. With what we're doing at Chore, there's going to be creative destruction, right? To go back to that point about people losing jobs. Like I tell my team all the time, if people are still hiring in-house HR people, in-house chief of staff, then we have failed at our jobs. I don't think those are roles that should generally exist except for very specific use case. Like if you want a really strategic chief of staff, totally makes sense. But if you want someone to go in and do like the day-to-day work of running the nitty-gritty of the company, that's an insane idea. There's a reason why Sam Altman and all these guys talk about the world being, there's going to be companies where they're worth $1 billion and they have one person, because everyone else is a contracted, outsourced individual doing a specific piece of work better than you could ever have it done in-house. And you just as the founder focus on exactly what you're great at, and that's it. And contract and outsource experts to everything else. So, but people will lose jobs. So why don't we go quickly into some of your history? So walk us through. So you started a company. It sold to Intap. What was that company? How did you start it? Why did you start it? What got you excited to even go build a company? You're on this like nice path of like doing the big company jobs, doing well on the leadership track. And like, I'm going to throw this all out and go start a business.
I think we can, go back further in terms of kind of a background. I'll kind of frame that out and then into the entrepreneurial journey, just so that makes sense. So I grew up in a lower middle class family in Canada. Went to school in a program in Canada. It's called the Laurier Co-op BBA. It's one of the top business programs in Canada. And the thing about it is you get to work a semester and go to school, work a semester, go to school, work a semester, go to school. And so before I had...
It's like any sort of job. What does it mean to work a semester?
So great point. So because it was a business co-op program, the program had relationships with many of the large financial institutions and large institutions in Canada. And you would essentially get an entry-level job as a co-op student. So for example, when I was 19 years old, I was in KPMG's co-op program, where I learned so much. I mean, to think that I wanted to be an accountant at that point in time was crazy. I actually, in their leadership training, I won a shirt that said "Caution, Accountant with Personality," and I was like, "Woo, this is!" And I still have the shirt to this day. And it just, you kind of work out the kinks while you're in school. My next semester, I worked at Scotia Capital during the worst recessionary period of our lifetime. And I think a lot of people our age has never lived through a recession, let alone working in corporate and investment banking during that time period.
Yeah. Was that 2008?
That was, January to April 2009.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah. And then I did my third co-op semester at Johnson & Johnson. And so, while I was at school, I worked at KPMG, Scotia Capital, Johnson & Johnson, had a lot of really great experience. I was going to school in a town called Waterloo, Ontario, which is essentially the Silicon Valley of Canada. BlackBerry was kind of growing at the time. And, at the time, a lot of the top business students went to either Research in Motion, which is BlackBerry. But for me, I had a job offer at Research in Motion, but I also got the job offer at Bloomberg in New York. And so for me, the big thing was taking that step, moving to New York, starting in Bloomberg's leadership development program. And that really changed my life. And it changed my life for a lot of different ways that I didn't necessarily see at the time. Number one is I actually ended up meeting my wife shortly after I moved to New York. And that was kind of the biggest decision that kind of changed the course of my life. We've been together for the last 15 years and, married for the last 9. And, just a really incredible experience.
You also work together now.
Yes, we do. Yeah, and so in starting in Bloomberg's leadership development program, what I really learned is really how these big businesses really operate at scale. I started, in analytics, helping people build their valuation models with Bloomberg data, in Excel. At the ripe age of 23, I made a big pitch to Bloomberg senior management that they needed to grow in Canada, which is where I grew up. And who would have thought sending Canadians to Canada was a good idea? We crushed it, and it really put me on the map globally. And it was interesting too, because growing up, you're like, oh, sales, I don't know if I really like that. But when what I learned at Bloomberg is this technical sales job is such an important skill set that so many people really don't understand. And Bloomberg really fed that love and desire to really be a technical salesperson of what the future could look like and helping shepherd that in.
Quick question for you though, briefly about this stuff. So one, going back to your background, right? You said, lower middle class. What pushed you in general to make some of these steps? Like, why do you think you had that drive? I'm guessing if you look back at some of your friends from high school or something, maybe some of those people might be in a really different place than you are. What made you different?
I think the biggest thing is I grew up in a pretty affluent neighborhood as lower middle class. And so for me, the key was like, how can I make the most amount of money as quickly as possible? And what I realized is
I was not it was like envy almost. You like saw all these other kids, their parents are buying them nice things, and your parents are like, we managed to get a house in the really fancy neighborhood. That's your nice thing.
yeah, I think what it was more than that was it was a motivation to really be successful, right? And really chase, for the top, and I think, I'm really fortunate that I've had a lot of great teachers along the way. Part of the reason why I'm so passionate about education is I had a lot of really, really good teachers along the way that really helped me see how special I am and how if I really work at it and invest in myself, I can really do better. And I think that's a perfect example of like moving to New York, right? Like it was, you're graduating school, you got a cushy job in, the town that you were at school for the last 4 years, the whole thing. It's so easy to just do the status quo. But for me, because I grew up in that kind of lower middle class home, I didn't want to stay there. What I wanted to do is really shoot for the stars. And so, that's why I applied to the jobs in New York. That's why I shot for the stars. And like when I became that guy that was able to get the job in New York, I thought that was like, I made it. Right. And what I realized, it was just the start. Right.
Yeah.
Because I have a really core belief that people think that money is the only thing that compounds. I really strongly believe that actually knowledge compounds.
100%.
And that was a really big realization for me, is that, you kind of think one part of the journey is the end. It's the same thing with an exit, right? You sell your company and you're like, oh, it's the end. And where it's just the beginning of the next part of your life. Right. And so I think that's what a lot of people really struggle with. And I think for me, I've constantly reinvented myself over and over and over again. But each of the things builds on it, right? So, for example, this experience that I had with Bloomberg was extremely, extremely valuable, right? Being able to grow a brand at 22 years old and like in a new foreign country, which obviously was where I grew up. So I had a whole lot of fun. And it was like, honestly, some of the best years of my life. That was a great experience. And then, what that really parlayed me to was, when I started getting noticed globally at Bloomberg, I got tapped on the shoulder to help launch the portfolio and risk analytics business for Bloomberg in San Francisco. And at the time I was just like, cool, I love New York, but like, sweet, this Canadian boy is moving to San Francisco. And, it was amazing because, my territory, what I was doing was everything outside of California, west of the Mississippi. And there were cities where like, I like literally geographically didn't even know where they were other than for the sake of professional sports. Like I remember my boss at the time, went to me and he was like, dude, I need you to be in Denver tomorrow to speak at this conference. I need you to be at Seattle the next day. And I was just like, dude, how do I get there? And he looked at me, he's like, dude, what are you complaining about? The plane does all the work. Just get to the airport, my guy. And it was just one of those things. And I spent like 10 years of my life traveling for work, meeting new people, doing all of these things. I'm platinum for life with Marriott, and what you learn when you do these things and you explore these places is you learn a little bit about yourself, in each one of those experiences. Right. And so launching the portfolio and risk analytics business, what it really taught me was, when I was, in analytics at Bloomberg, I was obsessed with like analyzing one security, really understanding the valuation. I became obsessed with that. And then portfolio analytics was about, hey, how do you take that whole portfolio, look at all those valuations, and then at the same time, think about the risk and return of that portfolio in a creative way. And I published a bunch of articles in Bloomberg Markets Magazine. And I essentially just went to all the people that I loved and respected at Bloomberg that were significantly greater, more successful humans. And I was like, hey, if I, write this article, can we co-publish something together and just learn together? And what I really learned is that when you do the work, you can bring a lot of people along the journey with you, right? Which was really incredible. And what was so much fun for me in that chapter was like meeting with new people, showing them how to look at their portfolio in new ways, talking to portfolio managers, managing billion-dollar portfolios and giving them an edge. Like nothing really showed me more about what the future could look like more than something like that.
Why do you think you had that personality to do that? Like, so why do you think you had the chutzpah in a sense to go make this presentation to senior leadership as a 22-year-old to say, we need to go to Canada, right? Like, who does that at a big organization Why were you the right person to do it? Why did you even get that someone say yes to you to go to make that happen?
It's a series of moments, right? And it's so interesting, right? Because, I've spent a lot of time after my exit thinking about purpose and meaning and, like all of these different things. But I think that like one of the things I realize is I've been channeling something my whole life, right? Where I like see a vision for the future that a lot of people don't. And so for me, when it was like, we're just talking about, let's say like, Bloomberg going to Canada, like for me, I was like, yo, all my friends from school are essentially sitting in these seats using shared Bloomberg terminals. Like there's an upsell opportunity to every one of these guys. I was like, I know the people, I know the things. Like for me, it was like so clear. I was like, how are we not doing this? Right. And so
this is obvious. We need to actually make an investment behind it and go do it. Like that's not easy. A lot of people don't take that initiative.
Yeah, but that was the thing that was magical about Bloomberg, right? Is that it was such an entrepreneurial org. Like I have so much respect for Mike Bloomberg. Like I think about, all the time, all the lessons I learned, through working with Mike, right? I also, when I moved to San Francisco and launched the portfolio and risk analytics business, I actually sold the first ever enterprise portfolio and risk analytic product for Bloomberg. And we actually commercialized an entire new business. And the reason for that is people were using our tool and it was part of the terminal, but they were like, hey, there's these other things that we need that we shouldn't necessarily offer as part of the package. And so that's what became the enterprise offering that we had. And, it led to so many other different things that we did along the way. We ended up acquiring, Barclays portfolio and risk analytics and index business. And it was this whole journey. But like, I remember sitting in the conversations with our users and then being like, well, dude, I love this stuff, but I need to use my own pricing. Right. And I was like, thinking to myself, I'm like, is there something to sell here? And then I would go to the senior, bigwigs at Bloomberg and I'd be like, hey guys, like, I got this, we've been talking about the different ways to commercialize this. What do you think? And so what was really cool is that like 25 years old, I was in the mix with all these senior people at this huge organization that had all this opportunity to do this. And Mike was just like, let's go. Whereas like, other organizations would like push people down and try to keep them in their job. Bloomberg saw this rising star and kept giving me more responsibility, kept giving me the opportunity. And I was like batting way above my weight class at 25. And I'm so grateful for that opportunity.
What made you really different though, right? So think about yourself as an educator right now. There are a certain number, or as an entrepreneur, and you've invested in many and seen many. There clearly was something that someone would say, okay, like clearly Josh is meant for some level of significant outcome and success. Like it's just sort of obvious. Bloomberg, I'm sure, tried to keep you around, wanted you there. But yet, you kept taking all these steps that maybe many of your colleagues did not. Like what made you different, and how do you identify that in other people, or how do people inculcate that mindset in themselves to try to become someone who can have the level of success you've had?
I think resilience and determination is the answer to that question. It's funny because, when, more than anything, I identify as a storyteller. The thing about storytelling, right, is you choose the elements of the story that you want to emphasize, right? And so people see my story and they're like, wow, like he's successful. He did this thing. He's a university professor. He's CEO of an AI company. He's doing like post-exit founder, like all these like, different things. But like what I always think about is I think about myself like a duck gliding on the water, right? When you see a duck, you just see it gliding. You have no idea how hard that duck is grinding under the water because you can't see underneath that. Yeah. What Josh Litwack is the guy putting in more work behind the scenes than anyone else. And I think anyone that's collaborated with me over the years recognizes that I'm not one to be like, oh yeah, look how hard I'm working. Look how great it is. And you see so many people that like, that do that. For me, it's how can I be better every day? If I get a roadblock, how do I bust through that? Right. And I think that like at the end of the day, anything great in the future comes with resilience and determination. And, when people ask me like, what can we teach them? Well, teach them how to think critically, right? Like that's something I think about greatly, right? Because I don't just go blindly into anything. I try to have conviction and then I chase the vision that I see, right? And so I think that's something that I've really felt for a long time is I see a different version of the future. I think I'm more okay with change than other people. And I think that like, for me, I have a really good sense of purpose that I align to. And I think that's ultimately what's driven me. right? And it's nothing short of just hard work.
I mean, that is one of the secrets for everyone I've interviewed for this podcast. It's just a lot of hard work in the end. And I think a lot of people forget that when they say negative things or think negative things about entrepreneurs. It's like, these are some of the hardest working people out there. And if you're jealous or envious of their success, there's no one stopping you from getting that too, right? You are this lower middle class kid from Canada. There were lots of roadblocks that could have stopped you from getting where you got, and you just worked hard.
Yeah, and not let the haters hurt you. You know what I mean? Like for example, like I'm Jewish. I'm a really passionate Jew in today's day and age. And it's really hard being Jewish in today's day and age. There's a lot of people that really like don't understand and don't feel, what it's like. And, I think for me, what I've realized is that you can focus on the people that don't critically think, or you could focus on the people that really do critically think. And I think for me, it's that sense of purpose and meaning and belonging that I really care about. I care a lot about being a leader in the communities that I'm a part of. I just try to, if there's a wall, just bust through it like Kool-Aid Man.
Mm-hmm. Love it. And how do you, speaking of the determination and grit sort of part, what do you do when things aren't feeling good? Like you're a very upbeat, positive person, but I'm guessing that doesn't always mean that every single day is freaking honey, roses, and gold for you. So what happened? How do you get through the tough times? Because being an entrepreneur is mostly about I think Elon Musk famously said it's like, eating
staring into the abyss and eating glass. Yeah. Or
how do you do it
with Steven Schwartzman? Yeah. Every day, presents its new challenge. I mean, I think first of all, I have a really good support system. I want to call that out. I have a really incredible relationship with my wife. She's my life partner. I tell all my students at the U, I tell them all the time, like the biggest financial decision you make in your lifetime is the spouse you end up deciding to settle down with.
I have some friends who are older, probably I think it's like 10 years from now, but a lot of people are like, oh, when your kids get to be like teenagers, all these people start getting divorced, and they're like, it is the most expensive decision you're ever going to go through. Plus, I think it just ages you like health-wise, everything. It's bad.
Oh, it's a million things, but there's also the upside of it, right? Everyone always thinks of the downside risk of divorce, right? But like for me, my wife, when I'm in a bad mood or when I don't feel good, like she's there to like uplift me, right? So I guess this is one of the parts of my secret sauce is that I'm really obsessed with goal setting, right? Mm-hmm. I learned this in KPMG leadership training when I was 19 years old. And ultimately, what I personally believe is that you need to set really effective goals and hold yourself accountable. So what I used to do is I used to have personal goals. And then when I started dating my wife, I was like, okay, you should have your goals. And she used to chase me kicking and screaming and be like, nah, this is stupid. Like, what am I doing this? Blah, 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 blah. But year over year, we got a little bit better. And now I don't even set personal goals. Lital and I have a couple goals. Everything we do is, what can we do to get the most out of both of us, right? And I think that's one of the things is like when you're really aligned with your partner, when you're really aligned with like what you want the future to look like and you're setting goals, everything is just a function of getting in and doing that, right? So for me, I guess one of the other things I should have added is I'm pretty methodical and intentional. I think just like starting a startup, it's all about focus, right? Life is like that too. It's so easy to get lost in the distractions of this and that. Like, trust me, ask any distraction. It'll tell you how important it is, but it's on you to be able to see what's important or not.
So do you have any hacks or tips for setting good goals? I mean, like, do you have like a bunch of sticky notes on your computer screen right now and just like, don't do this, do this, do this?
Oh, I'm way more methodical about that than that. So I guess I'll go into, how it came up and the tips that I have. So ultimately, well, actually, let's just go right into the tips I have. There's so much to go through here. So what I do is I've built an exercise every year where I set 1 month, 2 month, 3 months, 6 month, 9 month, 1 year, 2 year, 5 year, 10 year, 20 and 30 year goals. Wow. I have it across the top. And what I have in each of them
is it. What do you mean across the top? It's a document, or you?
Yeah, it's a doc. I've created a template. I share it with all my disciples. Like it's kind of one of those things that like to start the. Well, that's the thing. I don't have kids. I have no intention of having kids. I'm involved in a lot of different businesses, and I essentially tell everyone. Like I get a lot of people asking me for help on a day-to-day basis, and I want to help all of them. But my first thing is like if you don't have goals, I can't help you. So the first session I talk about is like, let's get your goals down. This is the structure. If you want to go through it with me, I'm happy to help you achieve those goals. But those things are really personal. But sometimes it's just getting the framework together that's really hard for people, right? So it's really simple. It's what's the date? How old will I be at that time period? And what notes in free form text, right? And so the idea is what you realize is for a lot of people, there's either a gap between their short-term and their medium-term goals, or there's a gap between their medium and their long-term goals. And so I'll give you an example, right? One of the big decisions I made in my life that a lot of people can't believe is I was a director at BlackRock, and I quit my job to do a trip around the world with my wife.
And I assume director, just so people know, that's a fairly senior position, I assume.
Relatively senior. I mean, it sounds great, but it's like, I mean, yeah. I mean, obviously I'm CEO of a company now, so senior's a relative. But yeah, it was a big deal. I was 29 years old and a director at BlackRock. It was cool at the time. And it was something that I thought I cared about at the time. I really thought that, like, you know, having that title and being able to do that is super important. But ultimately what I did, it was interesting because one of my medium-term goals with my wife year over year was we really wanted to go on safari. And what ended up happening is every year we sort of push off that goal, push off that goal, push off that goal. And so one year we were, looking at our goals and we were saying, like, well, if we haven't done this, like, we have the money, like, why aren't we doing this, right? And so some people look at, oh, it's so crazy you gave up the job. And people were just like, dude, are you ever going to work again? And what's going to happen? I was like, guys, I just want to go on safari. And then what I realized is, when you take 3 weeks off in the corporate world, it's very tough, right? So we're like, oh, we want to go to Australia. We want to go to this. And we're like, you know what? Let's plan for this financially. How much is the trip going to cost? How crazy is it? And we kind of looked at our like net worth and everything that we're doing. We're like, dude, we can easily afford it. Like, what are we doing? Like, so we gave up our apartment in San Francisco. We gave away everything we owned. And it's kind of great. Now I go back to San Francisco and my stuff's and like all my friends' places. So I did a zero waste move. I'm really proud of that. Zero waste. I gave away everything we had. It was really incredible. It was kind of this idea at the time I really cared about. And anyway, it's kind of a cool idea. But the idea is, like, it can look like a crazy decision. I gave up a very comfortable corporate job to go into the unknown of traveling for a year. I didn't even really know where we were going to go, right? Gave up our apartment and it ended up being the best decision I ever made. Number one, it was the best investment in my relationship with my wife, right? Like, spending a year together, seeing the planet together, exploring all of these things. You have a lot of conversation and communication that, frankly, a lot of my friends that are even 60, 70 years old haven't had with their wives, right? Because very seldom do you get these immersive experiences, right? And my whole view is that education is all about experiential, right? What my favorite band has a quote, like, it's not an experience unless you can bring a friend along, right? And the reality is like, I got to bring my best friend on the greatest experience of my life. And it really shaped the whole structure of my life, right? Because, that really led to starting my first software venture. Like, so many things are stepping points to other parts along the way.
So for the goal setting side of things, first off, so you've looked through this template that you share with people. By the way, like, would you be open to sharing that with our audience and I'll get a copy of it and we can put it up?
Yeah, I can definitely put something together for you for sure, 100%.
That'd be great. And so setting these goals, and you said you write it all down. This is the plan. And one of your goals, like, we just want to go on safari. And then that became a larger goal. And then how do you plan out? So this is sudden change. Like, okay, we want to go on safari. That leads to us saying we're going to go on a world trip for a year. That must have changed all your goals for the next 2 to 5 years or something too, right? Everything suddenly you redo your entire template. What happened?
Yeah, that's such a great point. It's actually interesting because sometimes shaking things up actually makes your medium and your long-term goals happen, right? Like, one of the things that I always saw was that, there comes a point in your career where you kind of feel like you've taken everything to the furthest that it's going to go. Right? And you're like, hey, where do we go from here? And taking that year really allowed us to, like, reset and think about, like, really what we cared about. And I'll give you another example of this, right? We always dreamed of moving to the mountains when we retired. Right. And we kind of had it as a 30-year goal, mountain house, the whole thing. We sold the company and my wife and I looked at each other, and I think it was 35 at the time. And we were like, what are we doing living in Jersey? Like, why don't we just move to the mountains now? And we were like, let's take another year to ski. And so we skied 85 days. We thought it was going to be a 1-year thing and we were going to go move somewhere for whatever we did next. But we had no idea that we were going to love the Utah community so much. Like, I'm now faculty, at the U, which, by the way, this Canadian boy being faculty at the U, and I love my students so much. I love the fellow faculty so much. I love the U so much. I knew nothing about the University of Utah before there, but it's the people, it's the experience, it's everything. I lead post-exit founders now for the state of Utah, which is, we should talk a little bit about that, right? And ultimately, there's all these things that kind of change, things along the way and reforecast your goals. So whereas our goal was, hey, retire and move to the mountains, what I also realized in selling my company is I don't want to retire. I love working. I mean, after I sold the company, I started getting involved in all these other different things. And I was like, wait, I love working. I just want a problem that I really like to solve, right? And then I started really going down that path and thinking about like, what could that be? How can that, going down the idea maze and like kind of thinking about all that. But like, it's good to shake things up, validate your assumptions and really think about that. Because some people like, if you think you're just, and this is the thing, one of the things we talk about at the U all the time, right? The days of someone getting a 4-year degree, right? Like, and then applying that skill for the rest of their life, those are long gone. Like, I think one of the big things associated with that, though, is that a lot of the times the job that you're preparing someone for when they graduate of a 4-year degree likely doesn't exist when they start that job.
In the AI world, right? I mean, people who started in computer, they go to computer science programs at Stanford or something in, 2000 in 2021 or something, and every parent's like, oh my god, my kid guaranteed a huge job at this big tech company, gonna make a ton of money and be really rich, and they graduate and it's like, oh no one's hiring for junior AI engineers, no one's hiring for CS degrees anymore because that job's gone. Like 4 years later, the best job you could possibly have is no longer in existence the same way.
Oh yeah, and it's funny. I get a lot of those parents of those kids reaching out to me and asking like, oh, cool, like, what opportunities do you know of and things that you have? And it's so interesting. I think this is one of the things that like is a super important skill of the future is like, how do you then take what you have and then adapt it to how the world has changed, right? And so there's a lot of different ways to do that.
So, okay, so your goals change because you're going to go on this trip. You go on this trip, and then you also, sometimes like, we're going to actually not retire, but we're going to go live in the mountains anyways, because why not? What once again, I mean, I know I keep asking this question to you, but like, what do you think made you different, right? There's so many people, your story seems to have, from my perspective, like, okay, all your friends you grew up in Canada. I bet a lot of them are still in Canada doing their same sort of things. The same lifestyle their parents almost had to some extent. You then go to Bloomberg. I bet there's a lot of people you work with at Bloomberg who are maybe directors a little bit older than you, who are still at Bloomberg and like living a good life, but maybe not that interesting or different.
Love them so much. But I miss the Bloomberg fam. I love it.
But different though, right? Like they sort of stuck with the same career path and kind of took the safe, maybe easier road. And then you're this guy who's like, no, I'm going to think differently. I'm going to go to this job. I'm going to quit this job that's crushing at. And I could have, who knows, been on a hardcore leadership track, maybe lead Bloomberg someday. And who knows, right? Like could have been anything. I'm going to go and just travel the world with my wife because we want to go do this. Like that is a risky move that people who just many people would never take that risk. So it's sort of an entrepreneurial mindset to do that. And of course, probably starting your company too. But what do you think, once again, gives you this level of confidence to say, screw it, I'm out?
Yeah, when you frame it like that, there's one very clear answer, right? It's a desire to be great, right? I have an obsession with greatness.
But how do I, wait, why? Okay, sorry. Yes, that sounds great. Why does that a desire to be great? And you're like, I'm going to go travel the world for a year with my wife. Like most people would say, like, that sounds like you're signing off and like you're, I don't know, it's the old rock and roll thing, like signing out, signing off, getting higher, whatever. And you're just like out.
Yeah. Well, that's where goal setting comes in, right? What does great mean to you? Right? Like for me, I've spent a lot of time thinking about what being great is. And each step, you learn more and grow along the way. And it all builds on each other, right? For example, like right now I'm learning with a world famous rabbi. And in a million years, I never would have thought I'd be a guy that was doing learning or, with a world famous rabbi. But what's so amazing that I've learned from this gentleman is that the greatness is within you. Very few people know how to challenge it. And what I'm learning from him is how to think. I would not have been able to do that earlier on in my life. I wouldn't have had an appreciation for it. But each thing leads to the next. And if you have a desire to be great and you have goals and you hold yourself accountable along the way, they all lead to that. Right. And so it's all just, it's the journey and trusting the journey.
Yeah, no, trusting the journey is huge. How do you define? So you said you have a clear definition of being great. What is the meaning of great then to you? And is it different for everybody, or it probably is, but also like, all right, I want to emulate Josh as a great entrepreneur.
It's interesting when you talk about emulating, because I see a lot of that. And a lot of what I try to tell people is like, you have to really go on the journey and know what your own goals are. And you have to have your own purpose, and you have to define what being great is to you. A lot of people, they see my journey and they're like, oh, that's great. Like I should do it that way. And it's not how it works, right? Like the reason why, I've been able to do what I've been able to do is because I've held myself accountable along the way through my goal setting. But in terms of what great means, that's a really good question. And I explore that in a lot of different ways, right? So I'm a leader in 3 different communities that I think about. I'm a leader in the entrepreneur community, which we're talking about today. I'm a leader in the music community. I've seen my favorite band 106 times. I just celebrated my 100th show and had 50 friends from all over the world come out and fly out to celebrate with me for my 100th show. And the third community that I'm very involved in is the Jewish community, right? And I'm kind of like quasi vice president of my synagogue. And, I think one of the things that's like so interesting about that is greatness can be defined differently to each one of those communities. And one of the things that's really hard for me, right, is how do I define how much I weight each community and what I care about? And at different points in your life, there's different things. And I feel really grateful to have that great support system in the Jewish community, in the entrepreneur community, in the music community. And the reality is those people and those relationships push me to be great and redefine what greatness is all the time, right? And that's what innovation is, right? Like you can't know what the future looks like 30 years from now. Each day you put one foot in front of the next and try to work towards it. And, it's funny. I think of like the goals that, I haven't accomplished over the years. Like, for example, my fitness goal. I've been saying I'm going to go to the gym forever. And I just really never did. Wasn't really my thing. Never really cared, honestly. But when I moved to the mountains, I was like, okay, I want to get X amount of golf days and X amount of ski days. And I will tell you, I got every single ski day I could, because for me, that was what being great meant, right? I moved to Park City. I took this risk. I did this thing, and it was even better than I expected. Who would have thought I'd, make a home out of here?
Yeah, that's crazy. And so, okay, so you move out there, you do your year of traveling, then you're like, I want to go. Then it was then straight into skiing after that?
No. So I was at Bloomberg, then BlackRock, then did the trip around the world for a year, came back 3 weeks before COVID broke out. So completely luckily, that was honestly, I think one of the, I think about how different the world would have been. I remember when I quit, BlackRock, someone was like, oh, can't you do this trip next year? And I was like, if I did it next year, I would have gone into a global pandemic. So I feel really grateful, obviously, for that experience. But I came back from the pandemic, started my first software venture, shortly thereafter. And then we were startup to exit in 3 years. We sold the business in 2023, that's when I moved to Utah. We skied 85 days that first year, went down kind of the idea maze of what I wanted to do next, became a professor at the U, all the other stuff that we've been talking about.
Okay, walk us through briefly. How did you get your idea for Intap, right? Am I remembering that right?
Yeah, we sold the company to Intap. The company is called Paragon Data Lab.
Paragon. How did you get the idea? What made you decide to start it? And then why sell it as well? Like, how big did it get? What were the reasons? Walk us through the journey briefly.
Yeah, definitely. So we started the company initially. I started it with two.
What did Paragon do?
Yeah. So we were a compliance technology business. And we started the company with 2 engineers that I worked with at BlackRock. And essentially, the 3 of us came together and we were like, hey, the compliance technology market is so undersaturated, right? Like, there's so much advanced technology in all these other areas of financial services. Like, how has no one really innovated deeper on the compliance technology market? And maybe we were naive, maybe we were lucky, whatever, but we were like, let's just build a better mousetrap. And I was fortunate to work with some amazing people with a lot of really great experience. And we did. We built an amazing mousetrap. And as we started growing and as we started kind of seeing the success, we saw the opportunity to sell the business. To be completely upfront, I wasn't super passionate about compliance technology. I was really passionate about like the problem. I really felt the problem as an employee of financial services organizations. Like, why is it so hard to pre-clear your personal trades? Why is it so hard to report your outside business activities? Like, I really understood the problem deeply. But to be honest with you, when someone comes to you and offers you a good amount of money and, you grew up lower middle class, you're like, I'll take the money and do something else. I wasn't so passionate about this, right? And so, for me, I feel super grateful to have gone through the full startup to exit process, right? Like, when you start a company, you're thinking about like, how do you build this great company? How do you do all these great things? But after you get an exit, you start really realizing like, it's really about your deal terms, right? It's really about optimizing and understanding. And I I didn't even understand like half of these deal terms. And I feel so grateful to my attorney, who's, an incredible human being who educated me and helped me see this. And it was funny because it manifests in other parts of your life too. I moved to Utah and I got involved in a group called Park City Angels. And I really, it's my angel investing network that I'm a part of. Really, really love Park City Angels. And, I went to this training on deal terms. And I thought that I was going to be the least knowledgeable person in this room. Everyone there has been angel investing for many, many years and had all this experience. And, they had a ex-venture capitalist go through and kind of help people understand deal terms and analyzing them. And within the first 5 minutes of this training, I looked at, the people around me. I was like, holy crap, I know more about deal terms than everybody else on this thing because I had just been through this exit and I had learned all of these different things and thought about it. And so now it's so interesting, right? Like, now as like a senior leader and as a CEO, what you realize is there's always two sides to every transaction. And it's really important to understand the motivations of each side, what people do and how that works, right? And so when you go through it for the first time, a lot of things are surprising or challenging or whatever, but it's like, once you go through the cycle, and I've spent the last, honestly, 2 years really processing that whole journey, right? And what I've really learned through that is that I got this opportunity to start something, will something into existence, as my, investor said. And now I get the opportunity to take everything I learned from that one and apply it to, all the next businesses that I create. And, my current business is by far my favorite thing I've ever done. And I wouldn't have been able to do it had I not had, this experience, obviously.
Are there key deal terms that you're like, this is something people should all pay attention to? Like, what were the biggest lessons from that exit from a deal term perspective or just in general?
I think the biggest thing that I would say in terms of that is just educating yourself on the dynamics of a transaction, right? I've talked to so many different people after, through PEF and everything. And, I thought that so many of the things that I went through in my exit were so different than everybody else. But what you learn as you go through it is there's kind of like the same way transactions go every time. And so what I would say is, it's really important to have a great team around you. It's really important to be communicating well, with your board and with your and with your founding team. And the reality of the matter is that if you've built a great company and people value it, right, there's a lot of great opportunity for you, right? And I think, what a lot of people really struggle to understand in entrepreneurship is they're like, oh, I want to be an entrepreneur. I want to be my own boss. I'm by far the worst boss I've ever had. Like, I work myself way harder than anyone else, right? And the reality is there's this facade about entrepreneurship, about be your own boss, get your exit, do that. Like that's not what it is, right? And what I think I learned most in getting the exit, and frankly being so young at 35 years old, is that the exit is perceived as this like ending point. But what you realize is it's really just the beginning point of the next part of your life, right? And so ever since then, I learned so many things along the way. I would have done this differently. I would have done that differently. And so I spent a lot of my time after my exit really documenting what would I do differently, journaling, setting effective goals, going through all this stuff. And I think, again, knowledge compounds, right? So, the dynamics of every deal are obviously different. The motivations of different deals are different. The structures of different deals are different. And I didn't know any of this. Like, I never even thought about this stuff before. And so now it's like, once you've gone through those things, you kind of think about it differently. It gives you opportunity to really approach situations differently.
What are key takeaways that you would do differently? If you're like, these are the things that I've learned that I would do differently. Maybe it's once again unique to you, but still, what can people learn from your lessons?
One of the big things I would say, there's so many lessons along the way, right? But from the exit in particular and building the company is like, really think about, who you're partnering with, who the people are around you, and who really helps you be great.
And right? What do you think? Like the people who are buying you want to say, like, are they going to be great? Are they going to be good people? Or does that not matter if they're just like going to pay you a ton of cash and you're like, cool?
I think what it is for me is I really think a lot about the people I collaborate with in the future and like the skill sets people have. So I'll give you an example, right? There are a lot of people that made a lot of money in the corporate world that think that experience is very directly applied to startups. Like, oh, a big company did this, so a startup should be like this too, right? I fundamentally don't believe that, right? I think, I've worked in the corporate world for 10 years. I've been a startup founder. I've worn a lot of hats, whatever we want to call it. And what I've learned is they're very drastically different. And what the business needs at different stages is really, really, really different, right? And so what I've been really careful of is like, who do I listen to? Right? Because different people are valuable at different parts in the journey, right? It's one of the reasons why I love our post-exit founder network so much, is that they're people that have not just started companies, but sold companies, right? And for every person that's started a company, there's many that have failed, and there's a lot of parts of that journey that they figure out. And so, this time around, what I've really been focused on is, how do you really bring the right people around the table for the right stage of the business at the time? And there are different people that believe in a business, early stage, middle stage, late stage, however you want to look at it. And I feel like I understand that journey a lot better now. And I'm a lot more careful about, who I seek guidance from, who I look at the definition of success. Because one of the things I think is one of the really hard things for people is defining what success looks like. And I think for me, as an early stage startup founder, I used to look at like the really big companies and I was like, that's what we need to look up to, right? That's who we need to listen to. That's what we need to do. But there are so many steps along the way before you get to being that big company that like, if you're focusing on what the big companies are doing, you're doing it wrong, And so for me, that was a really, really, really tough journey to go on, especially as a young guy, because you see people with a lot of experience, and now I've kind of gone through it. I think about it from both sides now in a different way.
So what made you decide to sell? So you weren't like that into the company anymore. The idea wasn't something you were passionate about, but still like you're also like, we're crushing it. You're doing well, presumably. Why not be like, we can be worth 100 million or 200 million. I don't know how much you sold for, but like worth even more.
I thought the business could be more successful at Intap than us doing it separately. Intap is an incredible business. They've done amazing things. The opportunities for what they could do is far beyond what we could have done ourselves. And what I realize is we had a great journey of startup to exit in 3 years. But the reality is what this team can do at Intap is significantly greater than we could have done individually, right? And I think that's one of the things you need to think about as a founder, right? Is like, how much further can we take this, right? How big is the market? How much do we want to do? And to be honest, I love all the people that I worked with. I'm super, proud of what they've been able to do. And I think the business is significantly better with them. And I think that's really what it comes down to.
How did you get to know them? Like, why did an acquisition even come up on your radar? How big did Paragon get? Why were they interested in you? How did they get to know you? Did you build those relationships, or they just kind of found you because they were?
We were interested in building a strategic partnership together. There's definitely products that they have and that we have that could fit into a lot of things. And there, obviously, there's always a bunch of people that things can fit into. And I really love the people on the other side. They're really great people. They shared a similar vision. They knew what they wanted to do. They had a lot of resources. And so, I think that, one of the things that, was so great about the transaction was just the fact that like, I personally felt like I took it to a place where I was really proud of it, and, they could take it from there.
Yeah, fair enough. What other key lessons, if you think through, like going through, like we talked about your journey, all these other things, right? Did you raise funding for Paragon? Like,
yeah.
What?
Yeah.
Okay. So you raised money for Paragon. Was a good exit for your investors as well?
Yeah, everyone did well. It was a good story. I mean, I always say, like we hit a single, maybe a double, whatever, so it was good. It was great, created a lot of opportunity for me. But I think the biggest thing and biggest lesson that I learned is that, really the best is yet to come.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's one of those things, is that like a lot of people, they just get so stuck in what they're doing now and they don't want to reinvent themselves. And I think for me, to be totally honest, I was so excited to move to Park City and ski for a year. That was kind of like my big thing. I was just like, hey, this is amazing. I can like do this. Like, wow, like look at the money, I can do this. Right. And then like, after doing that for a little while, you realize you're like, okay, that was great, but I'm excited to apply myself to something new. And, one of the things I think, and I tell this to a lot of, my mentees, is that like, always leave yourself time for processing. Right. Sometimes as startup founders, we're like so in it that we don't get the time to really unpack it. Right. And I think for me, because I'm like so in it all the time, I work 7 days a week. And I love being in it. When I got out of it, I used the time to like rewire and think about it. And remember, this was unfortunate. I took 2 of the last 6 years off of working. I did a trip around the world for a year, skied 85 days. Like for me, it was always about there's this like facade that people talk about, this idea of like work-life balance. I think it's like the biggest joke that ever existed in humanity, in my personal opinion. I think we're setting people up for failure, right? Like, work-life balance. It's like in a world of AI, it's like, dude, if you have balance, an AI is going to do your job, right? So for me, the way I look at it is like, I try to like really love what I do every single day. So after I sold the company, I thought to myself, like, what is something that I could do where I really felt passionate about what I was doing? So number one is I wanted to love the people that I collaborate with. My current team is the freaking best team I've ever been on in my life, right? And I'm like so excited to come out of stealth and like let everybody see it. And, everyone in the industry already knows we're out there. We built a great product. Everyone's doing it. But like we're excited to do the do and come out of stealth and do the thing. And, this team is freaking amazing. And then the other part of it is like, not only is the team amazing, the problem that we're solving is so much bigger than what I've done previously, right? And I was never one of those people that like chase TAM, even though obviously that's what the VCs want you to do and encourage you. But what I really wanted to do is that I as much as I understood the problem of compliance technology, the problem that we're solving right now is adapting our current technology of AI, right? And essentially, creating revamping an entire industry, right? And I think the opportunities for founders now are so much greater than they've ever been before. There's obviously a lot of risk associated with it, but if you want to be great and you see a big problem, it gives you a lot of passion solving that problem. Like, it's so funny, like, especially living in Park City, I'm friends with many people over the age of 65. I mean, most people around here, it's a retirement community, a slower pace. And don't get me wrong, honestly, I love my 65-year-old friends, honestly, more than people my age. I sometimes feel like I have more in common with them, to be totally honest with you. But one of the things that, I've learned in really being here and kind of experiencing this, right, is what does success look like, right? And I spend a lot of time thinking about like what success looks like. And for me, I'm 37 years old as at today. I live in the mountains and live my dream life. I live 5 minutes to the base of the mountain. I live 40 minutes to an international airport. And what more do you want in life? A lot of people really like chase this like different dream. And I think for me personally, I've really spent a lot of time thinking about, what I want my life to look like, who I want to collaborate with, what problems I want to solve. And, it was actually funny. Someone on a ski lift actually said something funny. I always love the ski lift, right? Because you got like 8 minutes, like you get to meet people and like kind of tell your story. They tell their story, the whole thing, right? And one person, described me to someone else as like, this guy is involved in all of the coolest stuff ever. And he's like, you're just involved in everything. And I was like, no. Those two things are contradictory. You have no idea how many things I say no to. like, I'm an open guy. I'm intellectually curious. I get involved in a lot of really interesting things. But as my friends say, like, I don't do anything surface level. I go 30,000 feet into every single thing I do. And the reality is, if there isn't the depth for me to explore, I get bored and I don't do it. Yeah. Right. So the reality is to me, that's one of the things I love most about life. It's the same reason why I don't really care to retire. Right. Yeah. Because for me, what it is I just want to be collaborating on interesting things and, achieving greatness.
Yeah, no, I know 100%. So tell me, you spoke a little bit about it, hinted at it, telling stories, right? What are, you were CRO of your company for a while, so chief revenue officer, have done a lot of that. You're obviously a good storyteller in general. And by the way, I almost want to name this podcast episode like the most positive founder ever or something. Because you really are, which is frankly a breath of fresh air.
I mean, y'all go on water, my guy. You don't know how hard, you don't know the hard times.
No, of course. That's sort of the point. Like, there's a lot of hard times, but you always have to be positive. And I think every entrepreneur who's great and is on the show is resilient in a million different ways. You have to be. Walk us through the ability to tell stories, how you've gotten good at it, and how you train other people to be good at it. Because I told, like, you kind of hinted at it. Storytelling is one of the key skills, arguably in life. Or maybe even starts with the story you tell yourself more than anything else. But like, walk through storytelling.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, so the first thing I would say is I look at this as an storytelling as an art and as a science, right? So you can look at the science part of it of like, okay, you got to have structure, you got to have angles, you got to have all those different things, right? And one of the things a lot of people don't know about me, but anyone that's really collaborated deeply with me, like I put a lot of work behind the scenes in understanding different situations, thinking about them differently in order to tell the story better. In terms of how I approach storytelling as the art form, what I personally believe is so my favorite type of music is jam band music. I've seen my favorite band Fish 106 times. And the thing about the jam is it's all about improvisation, which is this art of the yes and. Right. And I think that a good story is all about the yes and, right? A story isn't about just coming up, telling the story, leaving it out there. It's about leaving the space to jam with people. Right.
Mhm.
And I think what I've really always tried to figure out is how can I find my space in the music? Right. When I was a junior person, my space in the music was just brute force being the best sales guy. And you can ask anyone I worked with back in the day. I was definitely a brute force guy. Right.
Did that work super well or not? It probably worked fine because you're also really charming. But I imagine like leaving space for that conversation is better. Like than people always ask me like, why am I a good salesperson? I'm like, dude, I spent probably 10 minutes at least just getting to know someone and understanding who they are. And when we first started talking, it was actually about using Chore. When we got to know each other, I'm like, dude, I just spent like half the call just talking about myself. I need to know more about Chore. And I was like, that's how I want to learn about it. I'm just curious.
The biggest thing that I would say so this isn't the storytelling, this is the communication, is always be intellectually curious.
Yeah.
Right. I go into every encounter, what can I learn from this person? Right. And ultimately, if I'm uninterested in learning from you, then I'm probably not interested in continuing to communicate with you. Right. One of my friends has this really great line. She says, I know enough about you to know that I don't want to know any more about you. Right. And the reality is that, in my opinion, when you look at a situation and you try to find where the space is in the music, you can think of like who you want to be in the band, right?
Yeah.
So let's say a band is a guitar, drums, bass, and keyboard, just for example, right? The reality is, in my last company, I was kind of on the bass line, right? Like I was the CRO, I was the COO for a period of time. My job was get the sales in, get the customers in, build the credibility, do that. And again, in the music, if you don't have a bass line, you're dead, right? Just the same, it's like the heartbeat of the organization. I was the heartbeat of the organization, right? In my new business, I'm lead guitar and vocals. I'm the CEO, right? And so it's a very different thing. So now for me, one of my greatest, in my opinion, my greatest, I guess mentors, I should say, or the people I looked up to is Trey Anastasio, who's the lead singer and guitarist of Fish, right? Band's been playing together for 40 years. But what Trey does, Trey's an amazing, amazing guitarist. The guy can do amazing things, right? But the reality is he creates space for everyone in the organization on the stage to really do amazing things, right? And so, it's interesting. I look up to these musical leaders a lot of how they create space. One of my favorite musicians and a close friend of mine is this guy named Eric Krasno, right? Played at Park City Song Summit, and there were like 40 people on the stage, brought up all these kids from Havana, Cuba. And I asked him, I'm like, dude, how do you find space for 40 people on the stage? Like, what do you do to facilitate the music sounding good? And he said something to me. He's like, sometimes I go up on stage and I think of myself as the guitarist. And sometimes I get up on stage and I think of myself as the producer. And the reality is it's really important as business leaders to learn from things like this, right? If you're in a sales meeting and you're trying to do something, that's a very different energy than facilitating an internal meeting, right? And so for me, from a storytelling perspective, it's recognizing where is the space in the music? What are we trying to do? What's our goal? Where are we trying to get to? Sometimes someone can take the jam into a place that's like, not where you want to go. How do you pull the ripcord? How do you move to the next song, right? And a lot of it, a good meeting is kind of like a great jam sesh. You're giving people a great opportunity to jam out. You're creating space for people, but you're also making sure that the music flows. And I look at myself as a storyteller really facilitating that.
So storyteller, in some ways, you're saying is like a conductor to some extent. You're facilitating it. You're editing or curating that entire story. Is that the right way to think of it?
Correct. But if you think about curating the story, right, the most important thing to fill that story with and the space with is experience, right? Why can Trey create so much space for everyone? Why is he the ultimate storyteller on stage? The reason for that is he has 60 years of experience creating space for people. So for me, I draw on my experience from Bloomberg. I draw on my experience from BlackRock. I draw on my experience from Paragon. I draw on my experience at the U and post-exit founders and all these things. And it's so funny. People always ask, like, how can I be more interesting? And it's like, dude, go experience life, right? Go get life experience, right? Like, if you want to be a good storyteller, do interesting things, right? Like, I can't help you tell a better story if you don't got experience, right? People are like, oh, trip around the world, that was so crazy. That was the best experience. You know how often I talk about the trip around the world to people, right? And I can go deep on topics. Like, I have friends in all the places I traveled around the world because I'm me. And I just love talking to people. I love learning how the locals live. I did research on financial literacy all over the world and how people think about retirement and how they do these things. And it's like, now when I talk about financial literacy here, I can draw on the experience I've learned about Australia and Buenos Aires and all the other places in the world, right? And I have a deeper appreciation to tell the story differently because I know the people and I have the experience.
And is that then to maybe boil it down, is the secret essentially saying, like, if you're talking about your new company to people and trying to sell what you're doing, is it basically being able first to build that rapport with that individual, be like, this is who I am as a person, and they are willing to, and you could argue people don't buy products, they buy from other people that they feel something with. And is that sort of the secret versus being that early sales guy's like, I'm just going to jam my product down your throat. And I see this happen with sales guys. You hire some, we're going to take all about our product and not spend any time getting to know you. And it just feels like a sale. Like you don't want it.
100%. Yeah. So the key and the secret in my mind is establishing credibility, right? And credibility comes in a lot of different ways. Like, if you're an early stage founder and you're trying to establish credibility with people, the reality is you have to understand their job. You have to understand what they do, and you have to really be able to build credibility, right? And credibility comes in a lot of different shapes and sizes. So for example, I used to keep my personal life and my professional life completely separate. I don't think many people knew that I had been to 106 fish shows, right? Now, when I give my bio, I talk about, hey, I'm a post-exit founder. I'm a professor or a faculty at an American university at the U. I'm part of Park City Angels. I'm a CEO, and I've been to my favorite band 106 times, right? And the reality is in my new company, people are like, really? Like, you've done all that and you're passionate about this? And so it's this really interesting thing where credibility comes in a lot of shapes and sizes. And you as a founder have to think about, what are the different elements of my story that I can put together to really establish the credibility? And this is what people talk about founder market fit, right? It's this like very classic thing. And I think in this business that I'm running right now, one of the things that I really realize is I've surrounded myself with people that have differing skill sets. We are probably the most different team of anybody that I've ever worked with. But that's what's so beautiful about it. That's what really makes it so special.
What are there? You go into your sales calls or fundraising calls, whatever the sale is, right? With a clear agenda in mind. Like, do you know, I want to accomplish X? You like to set goals. So do you set a goal for that call and then tailor your message for each one?
Every single time.
Yeah.
Without exception. And I even go into like excruciating detail about it, right? So like, if it's a fundraising call, right? A lot of what I'm thinking is not necessarily trying to convince them of what we're doing, but like, is this a good investor for us?
Yeah.
Right. Like, one of the things is, capital comes in a lot of different shapes and sizes. The reality is, especially now as a post-exit founder, I'm very particular of who I want to raise money from. Right. And the reality is really figuring out, is this a good fit? It's the same thing in the sales cycle, right? I think I used to be so much of a brute force guy of like forcing the product down someone's throat. But the reality is like, is this a good fit for them? If it is, if you establish credibility and you show them that it's a good fit for them, then they're going to buy your product. Yeah. Right. And like, it's really not that much more complicated beyond that. But what happens is people, and especially junior salespeople, right? They tell their story the same way every time. Right. Yeah. And if you're telling your story the same way every time, either you don't have that much experience, right? Which is okay. If you're starting out, like, obviously, like, play the hits, do what you can. But why is Trey such a good storyteller? He's got 60 years of experience that he can draw from. And for me, I'm 37 and I had a couple stories to draw from, which, and I bring them up all the time. Right. And that's what I think is really important. Right. Is like, and the other thing too, is like, being intellectually curious. Like, I really can't stress the importance of this enough. Like, there's something to learn from everyone, but obviously I love how you're talking about being positive. That's a core belief of mine. Like, again, I think mental health is something really, really important that people don't talk enough about. I've had my struggles with mental health. I don't discuss them too deeply. But what I will say is that I'm significantly more positive on the other side because I have purpose, I have belonging, and I understand that. And for me, I've really structured my life around being happy. That's what I care most about, right? And everything else is a vessel to do so.
Are there key things like when you think through, okay, you're a unique entrepreneur, everyone's unique in some ways, but are there certain qualities that you have that you think you share with other post-exit founders or successful, quote unquote, successful entrepreneurs? Is it, what are those traits? And once again, like think through your stuff that you teach too. So you teach entrepreneurship. What are those qualities? They're like, this is what's going to make you successful.
I'll tell a story to answer that question.
Great.
So I went on the post-exit founder Israel trip earlier this year, right? And, all people that have sold businesses, I think it was like $5 billion of exit value going to Israel. And it was the most amazing experience possible. It was so good, right? And so the first day we're on the bus, we're like all getting to know each other. And, I feel like I had a little bit of imposter syndrome there initially. And I was like, oh, these guys are probably so much more successful than me. And like, what have they done? And one of the biggest things I think I realized in being in this room is every single one of us is an outcast. Every single one of us. None of us are conventional. Every single one of us is different. Every single one of us have that little bit of crazy in us, And what was so crazy is like, when you go to like build relationships with new people, you kind of like don't know. With every single one of the people on that trip, we just like clicked like instantaneously. And I think it allowed me to realize there was something in me, which is that like, I've been trying to be quote unquote normal my whole life. And I sat on that bus and I was just like, man, not one person on this bus is normal, right? In any way, shape, or form. And so, I think it's this spiritual discomfort that you become comfortable with, which is that like, I see a different vision for the world, right? Every single one of us did. And it was so inspirational to me hearing all the setbacks, all the things. And so it's so funny because, I don't really talk about my setbacks too often. I try not to be negative or anything like that. But it was so interesting being on this trip and realizing that we all had this quality where we all saw the world differently. We all had an intellectual curiosity. Nobody was like, oh, I'm always right. I'm always right. I'm always right. Like, and that was a very interesting thing to me. I was like, oh, these guys are going to have all the answers, and guys and girls are going to have all the answers, and I'm not. And what you realize is everyone's interested in learning from everyone. And I'd say the last thing, and my current business partner has really taught me this, is that never underestimate the value of being a great hang. Right. Because one of the things I think, we teach people is like, you got to be smart, you got to be resilient, you got to be all these things. But it's like, at the end of the day, you got to be able to be good at being human. Yeah. Right. And I think that like, if you're a good hang and you bring the best out of other people, the reality is that's the key to success. So you can do all the things, but every single one of those people was a great hang.
How do you think they got there, right? And what I mean by that is it's very easy, at least I find myself, it's easy to be like, I live in San Francisco, I can be a great hang, but like, I don't know, post-COVID, post-having kids, all these other things, I'm maybe not a great hang. Like, I'm just sort of like focused on my company and my family, and like, that's kind of all I have time for. So and also, I said, like, we're all a little bit unique and weird in different ways. So how do you also like running a company, trying to stay on top of all the crazy new technology that's coming out with AI and still have time to be a great hang and just like chill out and hang with someone? Like, that's hard. I find it really difficult.
That I think this is the best question of this entire podcast, right? And I'll tell you why, right? Because that's exactly what it means to be a founder, right? Is you've got to think holistically. You've got to think at the full big picture. This is why goal setting is so important, right? You got to look at your whole life and think about how do the different pieces of the puzzle come in. It's just like telling a story. So for example, for me, I've made the decision not to have kids. I save myself a ton of time doing that, right? I have no dog, right? I have no, for me, it's about chasing life experience. For me, what I love doing is pushing the boundaries of what's possible every single day. And I've set up my life that every single day I can go gung-ho into anything I want to do. If I want to be in New York tomorrow, I could be in New York tomorrow. If I want to go see a show, I mean, in the last week, I went to 2 impromptu concerts that I wouldn't have gone to otherwise, right? And so it's, when people think about it, like, and I just, let's tie everything together that we talked about, right? So number one, how do you build a good story? Getting good life experience. I've set up my life to be about having amazing life experience. I surround myself with the best. I try to encourage everyone else to be the best. I give a lot of free advice. I give an inordinate amount of free advice. But you know what people don't realize about giving free advice? You learn from every single one of those, right? So I learn more from my students than I think they learn from me, right? It's so much fun, like in a weird way, like working with entrepreneurs and helping them build their business helps you realize how far you've come, right? We all have this like imposter syndrome within us. And I think it's like so important, to really just call out that like, if you combine the skills of great life experience, a little bit of brilliance, fine. Obviously intelligence is obviously a part of it. We haven't talked about that yet. Obviously
even if you're listening to this podcast, you have some level of intelligence to decide, I want to improve myself and learn. So if everyone has a baseline intelligence, the rest is just hard work. And some of the other things.
The rest is hard work and life experience, right? Because here's the thing about life experience, right? Like, I think about going to a concert, right? You can go sit at a show and see the show, right? But one of the big things all my friends say is there is nothing in this world better than going to a Fish show with Josh and Lital. Why is that? Right? Because the thing about being at a concert with Josh and Lital is we roll in a big crew. We have a lot of friends. It's all people that love the band. Like I've seen the band 106 times. Like some of my friends have seen it 200 times. Right. And so the reality is there's this community. There's this, love in the air. And so for me, I've done a lot of research with one of my friends that's a neurologist on flow states. And I spend a lot of time, I actually bring a notepad to every concert I go to. Right? Because some of my best ideas come, when I'm in my flow state, being with my friends, seeing my favorite band, really bringing that out of me, right? Just thinking.
Who's this weird guy at Fish? Everyone's, getting high or something at Fish. And this guy with his notepad taking notes as he's jamming out. That's sort of a crazy picture I have in my head now.
But that's my message to entrepreneurs. Like, don't think about being your own boss. Think about how you can build an amazing organization where you leverage your strengths to do something great, right? I think there's a facade around entrepreneurship that a lot of people really struggle with. And, it's funny because like, like when people see me writing down notes, some people think I'm actually writing down the set list, which is like really funny, but I'm like, I'll leave that to the professionals. I'm going to get my ideas down there.
Yeah. Okay. So then a few kind of ending questions. One, like if you think through your key piece of advice that you would give your younger self, what do you think that would be? Like what advice would you have given your 22-year-old self? And maybe this sort of advice you maybe give to your students now when you're teaching them.
Trust the universe and trust yourself. I think that was one of the things that took me a really long time is I always thought I had to will everything into existence. Right. And I think that like, I think about this all the time is that like, if you have it within you, you should just be positive and do it.
Yeah.
Right. It's really not much more simple than much harder than that. Right. Like, it's interesting. I spent so much of my life trying to be like, what does this person think? What does that person think? How can I be? And then at a certain point you realize you're like, wait, am I the most credible guy to go to for this? And then you're like, wait, I just trust my own instinct, and I think that that's like a moment that I think a lot of people struggle with. And I think the other part that I would say is never, ever, ever underestimate the value of community. I think today there are so many people that are so lonely, so upset, so negative. I mean, if you want, go on social media, look at like what that, what's out there, right? If you want to be sad, it's very easy to do so. It's very hard to be positive. And for me, I really love to serve my communities. I love being faculty at the U, and I love it so much. I love being the CEO of a company and, building and developing talent. I love being the vice president of my synagogue and connecting spiritually with my community. But the bottom line is a community is something super, super important. And in building a business, you're inevitably building some sort of community there. And I think it's really important to think of what community am I trying to build and how do I do so?
Yeah, no, that's really well said. A few other quick things, but how do you break up your day? Like what is a day for, like, okay, you have your goals overall, but sure, but like, what does a day look like? What does that actually mean for you on a day-to-day basis when you're trying to figure out what am I going to spend time? Like, how do you just organize? What am I going to spend time on? What am I going to prioritize? What am I going to focus on? We really haven't talked about focus or prioritization all that much.
Great question. So I talked about my yearly goal settings where I set the goals at the end of the year, and for the upcoming year. I also do a weekly goal setting exercise. So every Sunday night, I sit down and I think about what am I trying to get done this week, right? What are my goals for this week? And I have it across all the different dimensions of my life. So for example, my first and most important goals are my health goals, right? So every morning I wake up, I walk, I stretch, I do an exercise called putting on my tefillin, which is a Jewish exercise. It's kind of like a meditation thing. It's part of my community here. I'm in this tefillin group, which has been like one of the most like meaningful things of my life. And I kind of have this like morning rituals that kind of get my day started, right? So walk, stretch, tefillin, eat breakfast, and then start my day. A lot of the times I'm up before everybody else. I'm kind of like I'm a morning guy. I always joke around that like 5 a.m., I would wake up. Some people go to bed at 5 a.m., and so like, different kind of styles. But for me, I'm a morning guy. I get a lot of, got a lot of my like internal stuff done in the mornings. In the winter, I really try to ski, not every morning, but as much as I can. I live 5 minutes from the base of the mountain. So for me, generally what I do is I'll wake up, I'll do an hour of work, I'll go to the mountain, I'll ski for an hour, I'll come home. I'll be back at my desk, let's say like 10:30 in the morning. Generally, I then do quite a bit of sales meetings and investor meetings. I really, really love selling. Like for me, it gives me a lot of happiness. I love the look on someone's face when you show them a future that they never thought was possible. There's different people that seek, satisfaction in different ways. And so for me, that's something I really love. And so generally throughout the day, I call that like kind of execution mode, whether it be, it's when everybody else is working, right? So you do the do of, being a CEO, the internal meetings, all that fun stuff. And then I take a break. My wife and I really love hot tubbing. So we hot tub kind of almost every night. Maybe 4 nights a week, whatever. And then we also like debrief the day. So we spend a lot of time like processing. We have a rule in the hot tub. There's no phones in the hot tub. So we just like spend our time like processing and talking and kind of thinking about stuff. And then I go into my nighttime work. And I try to match the brain capacity of where I'm at to what I'm doing. That's a really big part of, I guess I should say, of one of my secret sauce is that in the morning, I'm really alert. But I joke around with my wife all the time. I do a lot of work in my subconscious before I go to sleep, right? It's like, the administrative things, maybe the things that chore could take care of for me. But the reality is that, I try to not spend, peak brain capacity doing things like that. And so that's what an average day looks like for me.
And are there any like, okay, so it makes sense. And then
and actually, I should say I go to concerts probably 2 nights a week too. So like, my nighttime work gets supplemented by shows.
You're getting out there for different things that are non-work related and doing various things, hot tubbing, skiing, like giving yourself not downtime per se, because you're still thinking about work, but it takes you out of that mindset.
Oh yeah, 100%. And that's one of the things that's like so funny, right? It's like, and this is where I think the work-life balance thing gets this like facade, right? It's like, I need to work and then I have balance. Like if people think it's like this binary thing, right? It doesn't really work like that. For me, it's how do I access different parts of my brain at different parts of the day? Right. And I've learned that processing is a really, really, really important thing, for me. Right. And so I spend a lot of time really like trying to process. I journal a lot. A lot of the work I do on the weekend, obviously there's all the stuff you do as a CEO during the week, but a lot of CEOs don't talk about how much work they do on the weekends. I love working on the weekends, right? It's funny. I get people being like, yo, you want to golf this weekend? And don't get me wrong. I love golf. This summer, I've been so excited to like in the company I'm building now that a little bit, I want to be home working. And so the thing is work has this like negative connotation, like, oh, I'm working, right? There's some things I like about my job. There's some things I don't, like anyone. But for me, I love the strategy. I love planning what the future looks like. And on the weekend, there's nothing I love doing more than going on a hike, thinking about where I think things are going. I live in the most beautiful place in the world. And then I come back and I journal. Spend a lot of time just trying to get, and if you really do feel that you're destined for greatness, if you really do feel like you can trust the universe because you're trusting yourself, the answers are inside you. You just have to figure out how to get those answers out of you, right? And that's one of the things I've spent a lot of time thinking about is how can I bring more of those answers outside of me? And it's very hard to get those thoughts from your head onto a dock, into existence. And, I'm still perfecting that strategy.
Totally. Favorite fish show of all time?
The next one.
Fair enough.
I'm a fundamental believer in the best is yet to come. And I think as an entrepreneur, that's something that we all have to really internalize. I've seen the same band 106 times, right? And people are like, oh, is it repetitive? Every show is different. Every experience you have in life is going to be different. And I really do believe I wouldn't go to the next show if I didn't think it was going to be the best. I wouldn't start a new company if I didn't think it was the best. I wouldn't get involved in something if I didn't think it was the best. And so for me, I get this opportunity to it's kind of like a snowball, right? You kind of get more and more experience, and now there's these amazing things.
One last question I always ask: if there's a single piece of advice you can give any entrepreneur today, what is that one single piece of advice to achieve entrepreneurial excellence?
Question everything.
Yes, great, well said. That is a mentality, a very Jewish mentality, which I appreciate, and one that it's always asking questions. It's actually something
I'm curious. Because it's not just to find out information. It's also part of being a good hang, right? Like there's people that are like, oh, don't be interesting, be interested, and all these beautiful lines if it's helpful to someone else. For me, I think it's the same thing. If you're interesting and interested, it's called intellectual curiosity, right? And so for me, I go into every situation of what can I learn and what can I do to create opportunity for this person? Right. And I think if you're not trying to create opportunity for other people as an entrepreneur, in my opinion, you're doing it wrong. Yeah. I'm not one of those people that's trying to create a one-man AI company. Right. It's lonely.
We're all what people forget is we're all humans in this journey together on this small little planet. And pale blue dot out there in the darkness.
Be kind, be good to people, treat others the way you want to be treated.
100%. It is so true. On that very positive note, this whole thing has been positive. Josh, how can folks find you? If they want another dose of positivity from you, how can they find you, get in touch, learn more? Where can they find you?
Yeah. Hit me up on LinkedIn. Very, very easily. Yeah. You can find me on link, Joshua Litwack, CFA. There's more content coming in the future. Over the last 2 years since selling my company, I haven't updated my LinkedIn once. Which has been, I think attributing one of the reasons why I think I've made so much internal progress. It's been so nice thinking internally, and I'm really excited to become more external over the coming weeks as we exit stealth and as we announce things. I don't even think it's on my LinkedIn profile that I've been faculty at the U for almost 2 years now. So it's time. I've gone on that journey, and I'd love to interact with everyone on LinkedIn. So feel free to hit me up, and more than happy to help.
Excellent. Thank you so much for being here today. Your time is so precious. Thank you for spending some of it with me and the audience. Appreciate you.
My pleasure, man. Appreciate you, dude. Keep doing what you're doing.